Well, hello from the Isle of Lewis. Uist. My name's Agnes, and this is my daughter Betty, and my sisters Vary and Elsie. Actually, that's not true. I'm Elaine.
I'm Rebecca.
I'm Morven. I'm Claire.
And we're students at SRUC, and we're going to talk today about the challenges and opportunities of crofting in the Isle of Lewis. And
Yes.
Oh dear. Morven, would you just describe, while everyone's looking at the lovely pictures of Uist, would you just describe it for us?
So North Uist measures 17 miles from north to south and 13 miles from east to west. South Uist is 25 miles north to south and 5 miles east to west. Oh, where's my bit of paper? North Uist has extensive areas of low-lying macar, as well as intricate, indented and fragmented coastline of inlets, narrow channels, lochs, loch-ins, where the distinction between land, sea and freshwater is often lost. South Uist has major contrast between its ridge of high hills and rocky east coast, where some remote areas are difficult to access, and its widespread extent of macar landscape, dunes and magnificent beaches on the west coast.
And now for the highs and lows, mostly the lows.
The minimum elevation is 2 metres and maximum elevation is 336 metres. Eval is the highest hill on North Uist. Ben More is the highest mountain on South Uist and the only Graham in the Outer Hebrides.
Rebecca, you've got the fun bit. Tell us all about water on Uist.
There's an extremely high ratio of fresh water to landmass in the Outer Hebrides. In the wetter post-glacial climate, it is likely that early human activity in felling the island's woodlands caused an increase in surplus water. The lack of tree cover means that rainfall increases surface runoff and a rise in the water table. The peatlands hold a high reservoir of water as well as intricate pool systems. There is a wide range of water chemistry, acid at landward end and alkaline where the shell sand is blown, and there is a delicate balance between freshwater runoff and saline inflow.
And what does a croft look like?
A typical croft is a strip of land which starts at the sea, has macar, low-lying grassy plain, rich in wildflowers, used for arable purposes, giving way to black, marshy ground. In byland is enclosed fields near the farm buildings, and unfenced strips of common grazing accounts for 2/3 of grazing, can be used communally by a number of crofters for livestock grazing. Elaine, you've got 1 minute to tell us about the weather.
Oh, right. Weather in Uist, well, there's lots of it. It's on the border of the Gulf Stream, relatively warm winters with an average winter high of 7 degrees. Summers are rarely warm, unsurprisingly, average high of 16, long daylight hours with barely 2 hours of darkness, and wind and rain are dominant features. And if you've been there, have you been there?
No, not yet.
Nope.
Unfortunately not.
Well,
I think we'll need to this
yeah,
summer.
they're definitely dominant features. And the majority of the land is classified as very exposed, as our tent flying away was witness to, with average wind speed of 12 to 15.5 knots. The lower lying Uist, interestingly, are among the most vulnerable to gales among the Hebrides. And Claire, can you just tell us about the importance of Uist for biodiversity?
I can, yep. I have some numbers here that I've got written down. In Uist, there are 2 national scenic areas, 3 Ramsar, internationally important wetland sites, special protection areas identified under the EU Birds Directive. In South Uist, the Loch Druidbig Nature Reserve is a community reserve formed in partnership with local crofters, the Community Estate and RSPB Scotland. It's an SPA, which is Specially Protected Area, and a SSSI, which is a Site of Special Scientific Interest. In total, there are 20 SSSIs and 5 SPAs in the Uists.
Thank you. That's brilliant. So we were talking there about the croft and the strips of land. Start with the machair down at the bottom. There's a lot of arable planting goes on down there. Who's going to tell us a wee bit about that?
It can be difficult for crofters to get seeds for their crops. They can't be brought in from the mainland. They're not available on the mainland. So seeds need to be collected from the crops and then dried on the island. Some of the problems with this are the grey lag geese Because there are specific times for cropping, the grey laggeys can come in and they steal the seeds, and it can be quite detrimental for the crofters.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a lot of the value out of the crops.
It does, yeah. They can destroy whole crops.
Yeah, and then they have, a lesser income, don't they?
Yeah.
Unless they feed their animals.
Majority of the crops are oats and rye.
So hay has become a lesser crop in US. Traditionally, there was a lot of stacking of hay. I think it still happens more in the South US, but less so.
Yeah,
in
and
the
they still hand tie it
as
as well, I
Yeah.
believe. But I think some younger bloods coming in, I think they're doing silage, so the crop is wrapped, so the grey lag geese can't get to the seeds the same.
Yeah, it's the advantage of that. They didn't need to wait as long to cut it, and then with the weather problems that they have out there, which is obviously getting worse as time goes on just now, with the environment changing, they're predicting much wetter winters, higher wave heights and flooding.
Yeah.
So lots of reasons why they do that, but sadly that increases the carbon footprint.
And lowers the biodiversity for the market.
One of the other things with the cropping as well, when they're harvesting the crop, they start in the middle of the fields and work their way out, and this gives the corncrake time to escape from the crop, so they're not getting injured. And also when they're stacking it, instead of baling it, it's stacked so that the seeds can dry, and it's they leave the stubble a little bit longer as well. There are specific times for cropping, so that if any eggs or anything are damaged, there is a chance for the corncrakes to breed again.
Isn't used one of the few places that we have corncrakes now?
The corn buntings as well.
Grand. One of the other problems facing crofters in US just now is the decline in population. There's a predicted...
Was it 16% decline or something, I think, by 2043?
The good thing is, though, there's 33,000 people crofting in US. 44% of them are women, and 32% of these are incoming crofters, and 32% of them are under 40. So there are new opportunities of people coming in. I spoke to some crofters up there that were new to crofting, and they're much more willing to try having new animals, new breeds. They had pigs for their own sustenance. They killed 2 pigs and provided meat. They didn't need to buy meat, their own sheep and their own
self-sufficient.
There's a lot of that.
It's nice to hear that people are coming into the area to live, and these areas are not being bought up for second homes or holiday homes as well.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And keeps the price more affordable for locals.
Yeah, definitely. And continues that sense of community, I guess.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah. That's important. I think 94% of crofts provide less than 2 days a week's work for people. So they obviously, to sustain themselves, need to get themselves other jobs. So the National Development Plan for Crofting is addressing all these issues that we've discussed this morning. It's looking at providing new jobs, skills training.
That's right,
Yeah.
And diversifying, I think, as a crofter is a good way of...
And one of the things in the National Development Plan for diversifying is agritourism.
Right.
There are some grants available that are done through Visit Scotland to encourage people to diversify and go down the road of agritourism. And this also gives crofters the chance to showcase the importance of what they do.
Definitely.
And the importance of how they're involved in the local food markets as well.
And market their own produce.
That's right, local produce.
Yeah, so post-COVID, that's a good thing, an increase in staycations and tourism. And you mentioned agri-tourism, people coming to stay on farms and crofts. That's an increasing thing. Timber tourism is another thing where people want to come and live in wooded areas, and I'm going to talk a wee bit more about that.
Right.
Yep. And then the whole culture of US, there's the Gaelic language culture, the music culture, the art scene. These are areas that are drawn to people.
There's a Gaelic school, isn't there, where all lessons are taught in
That's right.
Gaelic, yeah.
That's right. Unlike the mainland, they have to opt out.
That's right.
So so the whole traditions and the whole culture is integrated into the landscape, isn't it? And to keep people on Uist, we need to support that. And the National Development Plan for Crofton is looking at housing and also looking at...
there was the Croft House grants, wasn't there?
Yes.
Yeah, they can apply for grants.
Yep.
And it was it 28,000 or 38,000, depending on where you are. I think on islands you can get up to £38,000 for home improvements or to build a house on your croft.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. There's a lot of good initiatives giving people skills and giving people support. I was reading about behaviour change can be quite difficult to implement. One of the things that I was thinking about was burning the peat for fuel with the increased fuel prices just now. And so...
I think there's, is it 70% of crofts are on peatland?
That's right, yep. And there's a lot going on with the development plan just now about peat, which we'll talk about in a wee minute.
Should we cover some of the animals on the croft?
All right. Well, traditionally on sort of crofts on the Outer Hebrides, you would need starting with sheep, you'd need an animal that could both provide meat but also fleece. So your traditional sort of crofting breeds were things like Shetlands, Hebrideans, these sort of animals that are quite small, very, very hardy, but have a fine fleece that they would be used for spinning. But in more recent years, the price of the wool market has really massively dropped. And now crofters are more looking at finishing store lambs, with a bigger carcass, and the fleece really has very little value at all. So currently they're looking at breeds like your Scottish Blackface, Cheviots, Clunes, Scotch Mules. These are hardy sheep that will survive on fairly poor grazing and should provide a decent store lamb to finish. I think the Mackers often grazed by cattle over winter because they'll graze the Macker flat, whereas sheep can be more selective and will pick at herbs and mosses and things, and that gives it a chance to be eaten right down to then regrow in the springtime.
That common grazing depends on the number of crofts.
Yeah.
How many sheep you can graze on it, the number of crofts divided by the number of hectares determines how many sheep you can get, and people tend to share a bit. If you don't want to do as much, you can give your share to...
That's it, because your numbers will go up and down.
Yeah.
Every year deciding how many you're keeping.
Yeah.
But I think cattle as well, because there's native breed cattle that they'll use that will survive the conditions, things like your Highland cattle and
The Shetland cattle as well.
Yeah, they're lovely wee things.
They're quite cute, aren't they?
Yeah.
Claire, you were talking about soil.
Yes, so the soil on the Macker is quite complex and quite fragile. There are areas that's thin, sandy soil that's quite free draining and has a high pH, but there are also areas where there are damp patches and wet hollows and iris beds, and there's marshy areas too. The soil, it can be dry, but it's also prone to seasonal flooding. If the land use isn't carefully managed with overgrazing, to prevent overgrazing or overcropping, then the ground cover becomes destroyed and the soil's exposed to the elements, and then it can be blown away or washed away with winter tides. The fertility of the soil has been improved over the years through crofting and rotational grazing and rotational cropping. With the cropping, they will grow their crops on it for 1 year and then it's left fallow for 2 years, allowing the soil to recover. And this also allows the flowers of the Macker to bloom as well. And you've got things like ragged robin, corn marigold as well.
Yeah, and there was Hebridean spotted orchids as well, all sorts.
Yeah, and you've got the great golden bumblebee because of the diversity of the flowers in the Macker. Then there is that huge variety of invertebrates as well, and there's
the pollinators which attract.
Yes,
and the invertebrates attract the birds, don't
they? Yes, they do.
Yeah, they're talking about funding for beekeeping potentially in the future.
Right.
Yep. As part of the development plan, they're thinking about encouraging pollinators. Yeah. You were talking about fertilising with seaweed.
Yes, so the macher is traditionally fertilised using seaweed. However, some people are trying to move away from this, and there is an increase in people using artificial fertilisers, which is damaging to the macher.
Mm-hmm.
It's such a delicate habitat, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
And it's quite a shallow soil as well, isn't it?
Shallow soil, yes.
It's when they're ploughing it, they have to set their ploughs higher,
That's right,
don't
yeah,
they? You
they
can only
do.
shallow plough, yeah.
Yeah, one of the things I was reading about was not every strip of land going down to the sea is a good source of seaweed. So someone that didn't have a good source of seaweed found it really expensive to transport it to their land. Mm-hmm. So the partnerships as part of the development plan with Macher Life Plus,
and that SPB as well, they were part of that too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there must be a lot of cooperation between the crofts with
Yeah, it's
common
made
grazing.
a big difference because before we had a lot of conflicts of policies. Forest plantations on what should be peatland, you know, they were all conflicting, whereas now they're a bit more joined up, which is good. Yeah, in this particular example, they had a bigger tractor and trailer, and they provided the seaweed for this land to try and discourage, because I think it's 21% of crofters don't use artificial fertiliser, so it is on the rise, and policies like this are going to try and address that and get back to the traditional methods.
All about communities and organisations all working together, working in partnership.
Yeah, a good example of that, another thing from the Agri-Environmental Climate Scheme, is the food tourism and encouraging local food networks. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, that's right. Crofters are encouraged to join local food networks and to try and use their produce, like locally sourced produce as well.
Grand. Polycurbs, these big polytunnels that withstand the wind speed. They get, I think it's 2.5 by 1 metre each, and it's a great place for meeting up, and it's amazing what can be grown there. And again, looking at local markets, since COVID and the EU, the markets are more challenged now, so that's improving that. Yeah,
I think we are beginning to run short on time.
Okay, we'll move on. So I touched on the Agri-Environmental Climate Scheme. They're looking at all the people things that we talked earlier. We need to keep people in the rural land. So looking at housing, attracting new entrants, skills, training, digital, tourism, practical support, exactly. Tourism, and it can be connected with the culture, the great culture, the language.
Vibrant,
the language, the music, the arts. We watched it. We all watched
wildlife,
the Macher. That's what people go up there for, not for a suntan. But we all watched a programme about the midges. We all watched a programme about returning to Uist, and we'll move on to talk about peatland restoration. 70% of, as you said, Claire, 70% of Uist is peatland, and healthy peatland can carbon stored in peatland, and healthy peatland can store 120 times Scotland's annual greenhouse gas emissions. It's huge. The benefits of peat are amazing. The water quality, they've actually found now that rather than expensive water treatment, they're using restoring the peatlands to improve and remove the carbon from water and the brown colour from it. It also reduces flooding, regulating the runoff and keeping updated areas wetter, upland areas wetter. But unfortunately, and it reduces flooding as well. Unfortunately, half of our peatland's been degraded. It's used as fuel. Another challenge with the increased price of fuel. People are going back to burning it, unfortunately. Tree planting, inappropriate grazing, and then once that
composting.
Exactly, using it for horticulture. Yeah, exactly. So that once it's open, it becomes dried and exposed, and then the carbon's lost back into the climate. So it's absolutely important that we address that. Nature Scotland, through Peatland Action, they're the guys that are on the ground providing amazing training, skills, lots of YouTube videos so people can go on and do it themselves, lots of green jobs, training and support there. And there's lots of new technology, lots of new skills and procedures, but the underlying principles are re-wetting and re-vegetating to keep our peatlands healthy. There's £250 million over 10 years. So
biodiversity on them is incredible as well.
Absolutely, so important. Yeah. Okay. And woodland, just also an important carbon capture. It benefits the livestock for shade and shelter, biodiversity as well, well-being of people in Lewis, where they're got a wee woodland area, very good for people's well-being, and again, lots of jobs. Yep. Mm-hmm. Okay. So, in conclusion, Claire.
In Uist, interdependency between the various habitats and people is critical to the community as a whole. The tradition of crofting is facing challenges of climate change, weather, population decline, increasing fuel costs, infrastructure issues such as housing, employment and transport, political and long-term funding instability, and post-COVID and Brexit changes to supply markets.
The traditional systems of managing the natural resources of Uist alongside the thriving culture of crofting and island life have the potential to address the many changes faced by the crofters of Uist today. The National Development Plan for Crofting helps to underpin and support thriving rural communities to adapt to climate change and improve biodiversity challenges. Its strengths are its nature-based solutions, for example peatland and woodland, conservation partnerships such as Macher Life and Peatland Action, and addressing the need to keep people on the land and invest in them. Additional income from the agri-environment payments makes crofting on the Machair more viable.
Oh, girls, I'm getting an urge to go back up to Uist. There's no doubt in my mind at all that crofters are going to have to embrace the world of dual employment, carbon audits, soil sampling, and the new industries emerging in agritourism, forestry, peatland management, and renewable energy.
The government must ensure policies provide incentive for behaviour change, provide practical support and financial stability by long-term policy plans, and find new solutions to challenges such as land loss.
Sorry, John, but we're not students of SRUC now. We're going to use to be crofters. Bye!
Bye!
I'm starting. It's never really.
Did I do it? Cool. Explain to us what sugary wiggery you're going to explain to us. Go on, explain to us.
I can't remember. It was black.
Cut.